Okay. So, loops. First thing I'll talk about is a while. Well, first, let's talk about loops in general. Loops are sort of like functions in the sense that they have curly braces, and that means that anything that goes inside of the loop are in a function block, right? Loops are special though, because loops, everything inside of the function block will continue to run until the conditional statement is false. Let me show you what I mean. So let's start with while loops. You need three things for a while loop. You need the while keyword. You need a conditional statement. And then you need a code block. That's all you need to write a while loop. And by doing so, you write while, space, parentheses, and then our condition. Our condition will be 5 is greater than 4, right? That's true. And then we will console log inside of the block, inside the loop. Right? Can everyone, is this big enough? You people in the back, do you want me to make this bigger? Like that. Like that. Really? Okay. Wish I could make this smaller. Okay. So this line of code is saying while 5 is greater than 4, we are going to console.log this string inside the loop. What do you think will happen when I run this code? Exactly. It will keep running forever. And it doesn't stop until, oh god. So REPL is kind of annoying, but like basically what I just did was I caused an infinite loop. Infinite loops are bugs. They run forever and they don't stop until your computer's memory is filled up. Usually text editors and Chrome and stuff like that, and REPL there's a setting that I didn't do, but usually they have failsafe methods that'll just throw an error that says maximum call stack exceeded. So basically, we need to know when this loop should stop, right? We can't just put in a true statement here. Well, you could, but you need to make it so that this is false somehow, you know? So how about up here, we do a variable called counter. And we'll set that counter equal to 0. And we'll say while counter is greater than 5. I mean less than 5, right? Because counter is 0, right? Does everyone understand how I'm declaring a variable called counter with the let keyword, and I'm setting that equal to 0? So now counter, whenever I use that below line 7, it will be 0. So then we say while counter, which is 0, is less than 5. 0 is less than 5, so the loop will run. Now, at the end, let me just delete these honestly. I don't know what I was thinking. Then at the end here, we can do counter equals counter plus 1. Or counter plus equals 1. Or counter plus plus. So that means that since counter is 0, like we're running through one line at a time, counter is 0, you console log this statement, and then counter gets incremented. So now, counter is 1 here. Once you reach the bottom of the loop, every time the loop is going to check this conditional statement. Once you're done inside the loop, once you're done running through one time the line of code that's inside the while block, okay? It checks the statement. Counter's not 0 anymore, though. Counter is 1. So, if we do this, we just get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Does that make sense? At the end of each line, counter will get incremented, and then once counter is 5, 5 is not less than 5, 5 is 5, okay? So that statement is false. And that's how we can break out of the loop. That's how we can avoid the bug of an infinite loop. Are there any questions on how this works? Yeah.
Can you use, I don't know what the case this would be, but can you use decimals within, so like increment by 2.25?
Yeah. So we can do like, I don't really use decimals, but if we could do like smaller like that. What the hell is this? Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, thanks. If I have a typo, just call it out, all right? Because it's annoying for me to like try and debug in front of you guys. You know? So yeah, this still works. Like this is still a number. It's still a type number. It's a decimal. It's a float, but you could still increment by that if you wanted to. You guys know like the main types, right? Like you have a string, a number, and then you have a Boolean, which is true or false, and then you have null, undefined, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there's another primitive value that's called a symbol, but we won't be covering that. Okay. These 5 values are all called primitive values. Okay. There's other values that are complex values, which are arrays, objects, and functions. We're not going to talk about this right now, but just be aware, okay? So any questions on how the while loop is set up, how it's working, and what to do? While keyword, open parens, put something that equates to true or false, you know, like something you would put inside of an if statement. While that thing is true, everything in the block that follows will run over and over again until that statement is false. Yeah.
So what would be like a good application of a while statement to do a certain task?
Let's say you have.
Like, oh, I want to print this sentence out this amount of times. Like,
Let's say you had a massive amount of data, and let's say that data. So when we cover objects, objects are key value pairs, right? So a key can have a value of larger objects, let's say, larger like amounts of data. Let's say you were looking for only the specific keys that start with a certain date. So you can loop through and check if each date is the date you're looking for, and then return that kind of data. You know, it's useful for getting specific kinds of data. And I'll show you. Here's a very simple example of that. So like, let's say I wanted to write a function log out odds, right? Let's say you just want the odd numbers, which I don't know why, but like, let's say you just wanted to do that. So we would do while. First, we set our counter, right? Equal to 0. And actually, we're going to log out all of the odd numbers up until a number that is inputted into the array. Just for lingo purposes, when you are writing a function, like defining the function, what you put in here is a parameter. Okay? And when you actually invoke the function and call it and then pass an actual value into it, that value that you're passing is the argument. Okay? So, and then while counter is less than num, we will check an if statement in here, right? If counter mod 2 is equal to 0, is not equal to 0, we can console.log counter. And then at the end, we will say counter plus plus. So, let me comment this out. So, if we do log out odds of 10, you get 13579. So, while loops are good for, this is only, I'm going to show you how you can traverse through things as well. This is like good thing for like numbers. Like we're saying, okay, we're doing it until it's less than this number that we're putting into the function, right? But before I show you how to traverse through like a string, and if you don't know what that means, I will show you in like maybe 15 minutes. Let me show you a different kind of loop, which ultimately does the same thing, except it's written differently, and I actually prefer more while loops. I don't know why. It's just a personal preference. But these loops are interchangeable, okay? Where you can use a while loop, you can also use this next loop I'm going to talk about, which is called a for loop, okay? So, a for loop, if a while loop uses the while keyword, a for loop uses the for keyword, right? And then we're going to open parentheses and then open our code block. But now we're not going to put in just one statement inside of the for loop. We're going to put in 3 statements. The first one is the initialization, the second one is the conditional, and the third one is like the incrementer, per se. So basically, these 3 statements are separated by semicolons. And you have to put the semicolons, otherwise the program will throw an error. So, when I say initialization, that means that the first thing that you write inside of the parentheses runs one time when the loop starts. So, you could say let I equal 0. Because usually, this could be anything. It could be 100, it could be 5, whatever you want, but usually you want to start things at 0. And this is going to act like our counter variable did for the while loop. The next thing that you write will be the conditional statement, when you want this thing to stop, right? So let's say I is less than 10. I is less than 100. Okay? And then, this next statement that comes, so the first statement is what we do right before the loop starts. The second one is telling it how long the loop should run for. And then the third statement is what to do after you get to the end of the loop. After everything inside of the loop, all of those lines of code finish running, and you end up at this curly brace, what are we going to do to I? I'm going to say I plus equals 10. And then here I'll just console log the number is 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 90. Why didn't we get to 100? Exactly. When I is 90, it logs out the number is 90. Okay? Then, that's the last line of code. So then, I gets incremented by 10. So I is now 100, right? And before it loops again, it checks this conditional statement. And 100 is not less than 100. 100 is 100. This might be confusing, sort of. Like, you might always find yourself one off in some way. A way around that is to just start at 1 and then go to equals if you're going by 1. In this case, I would start at 10. Because you see, we get a 0 here, right? Because then we would get 10 to 100, right? And that makes more sense, sort of. But I will now show you why it makes more sense to start at 0. So let's talk about strings really quickly. strings are traversable. You can traverse through strings. That means that each character inside of a string has a specific index. Right? If you make a variable, let this is a string. Oh god, that's stupid. Let Hobbit equal Frodo, right? So if you say console.log Hobbit at 1, oh god, what will you get? You will get, yes. Just give it a second. Yes. Because, and now this is why I said starting I at 0 is important. Things that have indexes, the first index is the 0th index. That is true with strings, that is true with arrays. Arrays act similarly to strings. So I say let Hobbit equal to Frodo, right? And if I'm console logging Hobbit bracket 1, that means look at the variable Hobbit and give me whatever is at the first index. The 0th index of what Hobbit is equal to Frodo. So the 0th index is the capital F. That is a single character. Okay? That's a value. That's a single value. Okay? But we're not looking at for 0, we're looking for 1, and that's the lowercase r. So, if all of these things have numeric indexes, it sort of makes sense that you can loop through a string and get to every single character, no matter how long the string is. In a programmatic way, you can access every single character in the string. Let's say I wanted to write a function that takes in a string and capitalizes every character that is an O. And every other character should be lowercase. So let's say we say function capitalize O is going to take in a string. So now, what do you guys think I should do? Usually, a good thing to do in a situation like this, when you're facing problems like this, you can change what the actual character is in a string by reassigning it, but things could get confusing if you start looping too much and like other things start happening, and then you might have changed something at one point in your code and then it's not what you meant it to be at another point in your code, you know? So a good thing to do, if you know that the function is going to take in a string, alter it somehow, and return something else, would to just be like, say, let results string equal an empty string. This is going to be the thing that we're going to return at the end of this function. And we're going to do that by looping through whatever this string is, taking each character. We're going to check and see if that character is a lowercase or uppercase O. If whatever it is, we're going to make it capitalized, and if it's not, we're going to make it lowercase. That's all we're doing. And then, once we have that, once we did that to that one single character, we're going to add it to that empty string. Let me show you how we could do this using a for loop. So for let I equal 0, okay? I is less than string dot length, I plus plus. I'm setting I equal to 0 because I know I have to hit every character. And the string's index starts at 0. Is everybody with me? Is anybody lost? Just tell me if you're lost. Yeah, you're lost?
Let's go back to the I plus part.
Yeah.
What does that say?
I++. So there's 3 parts to the for loop. Once JavaScript reads 4, it expects 3 statements, right? I think technically they're optional, but just write 3, okay? The first one is always going to run 1 time at the very beginning. And it's usually used to initialize a variable that can be used as a counter, as an incrementer, right? And then, once it runs the code, and then you get to the end, the 3rd statement runs. And that is something that I'm going to use to increment the counter. So I++ adds 1 to whatever I is. And then, after it adds I, it checks the middle statement, the conditional. It checks to see, okay, I is 0, so once you're done with that, and you add 1 to I is now 1, right? Is 1 still less than the string.length? If it's not, the code will run again. If it is, the for loop stops. Is that more clear? Cool. So now, oh, what's up?
What is the string bar?
Oh, okay, so every string has a length property on it. So if I just did console.log hobbit.length, you get 5. Because the length is how many characters are in the string, you know? And the length is 5, so this is how it could get a little confusing, right? The length is 5, but the last index of Frodo is 4. You know? Because the length starts at 1, right? But then the indexes start at 0. So it's 0 to 4, 1 to 5. It's always B coding, capital A, capital B, capital C. Well, I think it's just full setting. Yeah.
A little confused on what's happening with the, capitalized string part. So we use string length. The string that you're referring to is
That could be anything. That's, right now, I'm just defining the function. So when you're defining a function that's going to take arguments, you write a parameter. And this string is the parameter, right? This is the same thing as saying let string equals undefined. And then that string will be defined when I call the function and throw something in. Whatever string, whatever I pass into the function will know it as string. Do you see what I mean? That way you can pass whatever you want into the function. It doesn't have to rely on a single variable. But it does, because it doesn't matter if you're...
when you type string into the system, it just knows. Is it like a built-in meaning? Like when I type in string, it knows that I'm referring to a string? Or...
No, this could be whatever. You know?
Yeah.
This could be whatever. This is just naming a variable. I'm just calling it string, so just for myself, and then when other people like you guys are looking at my code, you know that it's whatever that argument is, it should be a string.
Yeah, I guess I'm just confused about, I know if you type, I get that you can put whatever there, but if you're saying, let result string, isn't that a different, result string versus string, isn't that different?
Those are 2 different things.
Yeah.
Result string is something that I'm creating.
Yeah.
And you'll see why when I'm done with the function.
Alright.
Right? But the string and result string are 2 different things.
Yeah.
They're 2 different variables.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Alright. So, first thing I'm going to do is we're at index 0, right? So, what some people like to do is set another variable inside of the for loop and say current car. And we're going to set that equal to string at I. Current car is now going to be string at, what is I the first time? 0. So if I passed Frodo into this function, I would be capital F, right? Cool. So now I can write an if statement. And an else statement. I could say if current car dot to lowercase, invoke it, is triple equals to a lowercase o. This is a method that is off the global string object. You don't really have to know what that means, but every type of data, like every data type, has built-in JavaScript methods. If you put any kind of string and you dot to lowercase, invoke it, the whole string will be turned to lowercase. And just like there's a dot to lowercase, there is also a dot to uppercase for strings. Not numbers, for strings. Okay? So, I'm doing this here because I'm saying whatever the hell that character is, I'm just going to make it lowercase. And I'm going to check if it is a lowercase o. Because a lowercase o is not equal to an uppercase o. They're different characters. They have different values. Okay? So, if this is true, result string plus equals, what is this doing? Oh, capitalizing. Is current car dot to uppercase. So, I is still 0, right? Let's say I was an O, right? If then that means this is true, so I'm going to enter this if block, and I'm going to say result string, which is this up here, is now equal to what it was plus that O turned into uppercase. And that is how you add strings together. You concatenate strings together. You take what this is plus another string. This thing goes at the end. Okay? So, if this was false, so in if-else block, if this is true, that means the else won't run. But if this isn't true, whatever it is left, we're just going to say results string plus equals current car dot to lowercase. And then we will return result string. So now, if I say, what is this called? Capitalize O. So I'll say let answer equal capitalize O, and I'm going to pass in Hobbit. And then I'm going to console.log the answer. Did you just see what I did? This is amazing. This is why you guys are here. Just kidding. But like, seriously, that's what happens. And if you remember what Frodo was, Frodo is capital F, lowercase o's. And I changed that F to a lowercase f, and I changed the o's to uppercase o's. Would it be helpful if I ran through step by step what is happening inside of that function? Cool. Cool. So, when you run the program, nothing is happening, nothing is happening, nothing is happening, nothing is happening. Well, it's defining a variable, declaring a variable Hobbit and assigning it a string that's Frodo. And then it's declaring a function called capitalize 0, and this is what it is. But nothing's actually running yet. This function isn't running at this point in time. Still not running, we hit line 60. I'm declaring a variable answer, and I'm setting it equal to capitalize O and passing it in Hobbit. So, what JavaScript is doing at this point is it's saying Okay, I have to assign answer a value. What is that value? Oh, you're invoking a function? That function returns something. So I have to run the function to get the value so I can put it in answer. Okay? Does everyone understand that? Does that make sense, how I'm saying that? Okay, cool. So now, this function up here is running. And we're throwing Hobbit into it, right? So that means that string is equal to Frodo. Does that make sense?
Wait, repeat that.
String is equal to Frodo. Because I threw Hobbit into here. And Hobbit is equal to Frodo, right? Right? Hobbit's equal to Frodo. Who says I'm wrong? Hobbit is equal to Frodo. So when you throw it into capitalize O, this string is equal to Frodo. Because that's what parameters do. When you write them in function definitions, they capture the elements that you pass into them. So now string is Frodo. So this function runs. Okay, I'm declaring a variable called result string, and I'm setting it equal to an empty string. Cool. Then we hit a for loop. We say, okay, here's a new variable. Let I equal 0. I is less than string.length. I plus plus. These are just the, if you will, the rules of the for loop, okay? They're the rules. So we're setting I equal to 0, and now we're going to run through the for loop, because that's the first thing that happens. All this stuff doesn't happen yet. I is equal to 0. Well, actually, it does check if this is true, because let's say that we passed it an empty string, then this would never run. Because an empty string's length is 0, and that does not fulfill the statement, right? But I is equal to 0, and I has a value, okay? I mean string.length is not 0, right? Okay. So now inside of the for loop, we are going to say let current car. We're declaring a new variable called current car. And we're going to set that equal to string at I. I is equal to what? Cool. So I'll put this up here. So what is string at 0? The capital F, right? So now current car is equal to capital F at this point in time. Then it hits an if statement. If current car, which is a capital F, got 2 lowercase, so that means this entire statement is now equal to lowercase f. Okay? That's what that means. It takes whatever it was, even if it was lowercase, it doesn't matter, it just spits out the lowercase character. And we see if that is triple equals to a lowercase o. Lowercase f is not equal to lowercase o. So, what is inside of the if block doesn't run. JavaScript does not look at that code. But it does see an else, and in an if-else, if that's not true, then we're going to do this, no matter what. So, we're just going to say result string, which is an empty string, is now equal to its previous value plus whatever current character is, dot to lowercase. So the lowercase version of an f. Then we exit the else block, and then I is incremented by 1. I is now equal to 1. And is that less than the length of the string? No. I mean, yeah, it is. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. 1 is less than the string's length, right? So we're going to go through another round in the for loop. But current character is no longer the f. Now, because that was done, right? That was done. We're done with that. But now I'm defining it again, right? Let current character, and you could do this inside of loops, right? Let current character equal string at 1. That's an R. And then we go through the same process again. Is that 2 lowercase and O? No. So we're going to say result string And the result string is outside of the for loop. If this was inside of the for loop, it would be set to an empty string every time. So, good, like, if you guys don't want buggy code, if you're going to loop through something and add something to something else, put it outside of the for loop. Because while this loop is running, we can still add things to this thing out here, right? So at this point in time, this is just a lowercase f. So we're going to say that lowercase elf is now equal to that lowercase f plus a lowercase r. So now, result string is fr. Does everyone see what's going on? So then, I is now 2, right? We exit the else, increment I is 2. Is 2 less than the length? Yes. So we keep going. Current character is now string at 2, and we finally found our first O. And I wrote a program that can detect that because I'm saying if this is uppercase or lowercase, whatever, current character dot to lowercase, that 0 to lowercase, is that equal to 0? Yes. So now, result string will be whatever it was, which is fr, and it's going to set that equal to fr plus the O. So you get FRO. Well, capitalized because of the capital to uppercase, yeah.
Why do you have to put the dot to lowercase first? Because like if it's a different letter, I thought the 3 equal signs means it has to be exactly that. So like if it's a different letter, it's obviously not O. Or if it's an uppercase O, it's usually the O.
Because this if statement, this is what happens, right? If this if statement isn't fulfilled, capital O is not equal to this, right? But here I'm changing it to lowercase because I said every other character should be lowercase. If every other character could have been left alone and I just wanted to uppercase all the O's, you're right, I could do that. That's true. But in this situation, I'm not. It's whatever. Good awareness. Does everyone understand how this is happening? The main takeaways from this is how to set up a for loop, and that strings are traversable. Okay? Okay. So let me show you something else with strings. So I will say let other hobbit equal to Mary. Cool. So now I'm going to use something that is called the dot slice method. Oh shit. Has anyone seen that before? No? That's cool. Doesn't matter. Slice is also a string method. Slice is also an array method. But don't worry about arrays right now. Right now, worry about strings. So, slice, basically, what it does is you pass into these parentheses, you can pass a number to that. And that is basically the start index, right? So if I console logged other hobbit dot slice of 1, what I'm going to get is array. Because what you're passing into slice is what index that it's going to start. And it starts at index 1, which is E. Including that index, it takes everything and slices it off and returns that. So that's why you see array in the console. You can also tell it, you can also pass it a second argument. You can pass it a stop index. So now we just get the E. The stop index does not include the character at that index. The start index does, the stop index doesn't, okay? So, I'm going to use this method to write a valid while loop. while other hobbit dot length. Wait a second. Other hobbit is equal to Mary. So Mary's length is 5. 5 is true, right? 5 is a truthy value. So how am I going to do this? How am I going to make sure that there isn't an infinite loop? We are going to say, well, first we'll just like console log every letter, I guess, because you got to do something, right? We could do other hobbit at 0. And then we can say other hobbit is now equal to other hobbit dot slice 1. And then you get Mary. Because, sorry, let me move this up. Because while other hobbit dot length, other hobbit's length is 5. So we enter the while loop. This is true. What's going to happen? Everything's going to happen. Console.log. Other hobbit at index 0. You get the end. Okay? Then, at the end, we're reassigning other hobbit to its previous value, but slicing off the first letter. Right? Dot slice of 1 will say start at index 1, which is E, include that, and give me everything to the end. So now, other hobbit.length, it's still true, but it's not 5 anymore, it's 4. Because we're reassigning what other hobbit is. I just wanted to show you guys something like this because while loops, even for loops, don't have to be like, oh, this should start at 0, this should increment by 1 every time forever. You can mess around with loops and like change how much they go up by, when to stop, whatever you want, where to start at, doesn't matter. They're just variables, but you're writing the code. And the reason why I actually prefer for loops to while loops is because while loops, like, you kind of have to worry, like, when I like writing loops, I like defining when and where it's going to stop right at the beginning. And then, like, right when I open the code box, I like to write all of my logic. But while loops, like, it's easy to forget to put, like, the increment. But anything you could solve, any problem you can solve with a for loop, you can solve with a while loop, and vice versa. Okay? Yeah.
This is this might be a weird question, but could you tell me right now that function?
Yeah, it's just a
that
while loop.
that loop. Could you articulate that in like a plain English conditional statement, like what that actually means? Sorry.
It's like saying, okay, other hobbit is a string, right?
Yeah.
And it's married.
Yeah.
And it has length, right? So while this string has characters inside of it, we're going to log out the first letter. But after we log out that letter, we're going to delete the first letter, and then we're going to take that string and then loop through that. Do the same thing over and over again.
What utility is the original parentheses like other hobbit dot length? Like I know that equals 5.
Yeah.
But what utility should that actually
What do you mean
serve?
utility?
Well, what use would
Length?
function? Function's a little terminus, but
Well, length, like I showed you before in the for loop, like if you want, let's say you had, because when you guys are working with real data, if you're actual developers and you're working with lots of data, let's say you're writing a function and you want to transform that data or send all of that data to different places, right? Usually that data is going to be in an array. And arrays, like strings, have length. So that's a good way to set up a loop. Stop when this is over. Stop when I is less than the length. So that ensures that you hit every single point of the data. Just like a string,
okay, but
you get to every character.
yeah, but there isn't an I.
Exactly.
That one, so why does this still work?
Because other hobbit on line 71, I'm changing its value.
Yeah.
So now, like on line 64, it's Mary, right? But after we start going to the while loop, and after line 71, other Hobbit is now Eri.
Yeah.
And the length of Eri is not 5, it's 4. So 4 is true, just like 5. So the while loop continues. And then we're going to log out other Hobbit at 0. And at that point in time, other Hobbit at 0 is E. Because that's what slice of 1 is doing.
Yeah.
And then we're going to slice off that one. So the E is gone, and now we just have RRY. And it keeps going and going until you have the Y.
Yeah.
And then the
I guess
Y
I get
that's...
that point. But, okay, so what I'm seeing here, okay, well, like console.log.
Okay, wait, that dot length of an empty string is 0. 0 is false.
Okay.
So the loop breaks.
Okay.
0 is not true. That's why it breaks. Because once you slice out the last letter, you don't have a length anymore. It's just length is 0.
Yeah.
So that's why that works. The point is to like do whatever it is you put inside of that statement. Whatever it is you're doing, just make that statement false eventually, or you'll end up with an infinite. Yeah.
Why is it slice 1 and not 0?
Slice of 0 just returns the string. Because the first, so slice takes 2 arguments. I think it takes only 2. It might take a third. Slice takes 2 arguments, right? A start index and a stop index. And these are indexes, right? But the start index includes the character at that index, and the stop index does not, right? It tells you, okay, start at index 1, whatever's at index 1, take that. And if it's like stop at index 2, it's like, okay, we'll go 1 more to index 2, but don't include that, just take what we have already. So that's why slice of 1 to 2, or 3 to 4, or 5 to 6 will return one thing, one character. Cool? Yeah.
The condition in the while loop, even though it's a number, when it gets to 0, it becomes like Boolean and false.
So there are several falsy values, right? An empty string is false. 0 is false. Null is false. Undefined is false. False is false. Any of those numbers will not run an if statement or a while loop, and it will stop for you. Whatever goes into that conditional just has to be a falsy value. When I say falsy, I don't actually mean the value false, because true and false are actual values in JavaScript, booleans. But every other data type has a falsy like version of itself, except for it. Yeah.
Why in the console log other Hobbit there's 0 and then other Hobbit has 1?
So here in the console log, this is line 70 is where we're actually going to print one letter to the console. So we're going to start at the 0th index. Well, not start, it's just always going to print the 0th index. That's always the first letter. But then this line says, delete the first letter. M is deleted, pretty much. That's not actually what's happening, but like M is deleted. It's gone. Other Hobbit is now Eri. So when the loop starts again, what's the first letter? Exactly. And that happens over and over again until you only have a Y, you slice that off, and then there's no more letters. There's no more length. It's 0, doesn't run.
So you don't have to like do other Hobbit that slice 2 because it keeps
Yes.
reading something.
Because we are reassigning what other Hobbit is. Other Hobbit is changing every time. That actual value, the variable, is changing. Now I'm going to go into the slides. Oh, slides. Yeah, what the You guys like loops? You guys will be using loops in almost like every function we write. I'll just show you guys like this, because I think something's up with my computer. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we will be going over loops, while loop, for loop, and I'll show you two keywords that I didn't show you in the REPL, break and continue. And then I'll talk about debugging a little bit, okay? Interpreting a stack trace, error message, debugging a failing test, and using debugger. So a while loop requires three elements like I showed you before. The while keyword, a conditional expression that evaluates to a Boolean value, and a block of code. So you have while, parentheses, you put your conditional, and then you write your code. The block of code will run over and over as long as the conditional expression evaluates to true. Everyone good? This is the basic logic behind looping. So if you have let count equal 3, and you while the count is greater or equal to 1, console.log count is count, and then you do count minus minus. Count is 3, count is 2, count is 1. Like plus plus minus minus takes whatever count was and subtracts 1. Okay? So, like I was always going up, you can also loop down, right? 3, 2, 1. Cool? Yeah.
Okay, so here's, I totally get this. This makes sense to me.
Cool.
What was confusing about the other statement was that in the first parentheses where here it says count, that's greater than or equal to 1. That's like a conditional statement. I get that. I get like
That returns true or false.
I get that that's either true or false, but for the other one that was like,
Length.
on the dot length, isn't that just like, is that ever be true or false? Like, why is that?
So here it says it evaluates to a Boolean value. That doesn't mean it equals a Boolean value. So JavaScript does this thing that's called type coercion, which I think is for tomorrow, right? Basically, you can coerce things into different types. You can make a string that has the character of 5 into an actual number. You can make a 0 into false. And that's what JavaScript is doing behind the scenes. That's what I mean by falsy values. They can be coerced into false.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
So 0 is not meant.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like if you do like if 0, it's that if statement's never going to run. For sure. Cool? Alright. So while false, console.log, this line of code will never run, and you see in the makeshift terminal, it never runs. While true, this line will run forever until the machine running the code runs out of memory. I showed you guys this, and it pretty much broke REPL, right? Too much memory. So, let count equal to 3, but you have to make sure that your conditional is eventually false, right? So this is the same code as before, but without the count minus minus. So you just get count as 3 forever until your machine breaks. Any questions on that? Cool. So a for loop requires 3 elements. The for keyword, 3 optional expressions, and a block of code. It says optional, but like just write all 3, because like why? Maybe you'll find like a use case where you don't really need something else, but like maybe you don't need to increment something or something like that. But whatever. So the initialization, condition, and final expression, and these are separated by semicolons. They need to be separated by semicolons, or JavaScript. If this isn't here, JavaScript will think that this entire thing is the initialization, okay? The block of code will run over and over until the condition evaluates to false, just like a while loop. So the initialization is run first and only once, and it's often used to define a counter variable. Then, before every iteration, the condition... Okay, sorry, I messed up. I told you guys it happens at the end. Before every iteration, it checks to see if that condition is true. If it is, the loop will run one more iteration. And then after each iteration, the final expression is run. So you get for I is equal to 1, I is less than or equal to 3, I plus plus. First, we make a variable I, then we check and see if it's less than or equal to 3, but I is 1, so that's true. We run the code, you get I is 1, because that's what's being consoled over here. Then we add 1 to I, and we do that over and over again until this condition breaks. It's literally the same as a for loop, except you put all of your rules in the beginning, instead of defining the counter outside of the for loop and putting the incrementer at the bottom. Understand? Okay. So yeah, like the while loop I showed earlier, you can use the for loop in either direction as well. You could say 5, let I equal to 5, while I is greater than or equal to 1, and then you subtract 1 from I every time. And that's how you do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you can increment by any number. I equal 100, I is less than or equal to 300, I plus equals 100. 100, 200, 300, done. This makes sense, right? Is anyone confused? What's up?
Set I, like let I equal 100.
Yeah.
Is I going to be set somewhere else too, and then
No. No.
okay, so I is 100.
I is 100. I isn't set anywhere else. So if you try and access I outside of the for loop, I will be undefined. Because let is block scoped. Okay? That means that this variable I is only available to everything inside of this. Okay? We'll go over what scope means 2 days from now. You can't access that variable outside of the for loop. So you can use for loops to iterate through a string. So let letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you say I is 0, and you want to loop until I is less than, you want to loop as long as I is less than letters.length. And then you just add I every time at the end. So you have current letter, letters of I, and then you just console log the current letter. And then that's what you get. Can you guys see over here? What's up?
What's the box bracket that I is in?
So that's called bracket notation, right? So letters is this, right? Letters is the string. So if you want to access the character at a specific index, you do bracket number. That's called bracket notation. You do the name of the variable, bracket, and then like 0. You'll get the first one. But here we have I. And you can put in a variable that isn't a number, as long as it equals a number, right? So I will be equal to something different every single time, and that's how you get it. Cool? Dope. So let's talk about the continue. I didn't show you guys this, but this is available in for loops and while loops, okay? The continue keyword will cause the loop to skip to the next iteration. This could be very useful. Do you remember how I said to log out all the odd numbers? I said if I mod 2 is not equal to 0, and then do something? What I could have done is if I mod 0 is equal, if I mod 2 is equal to 0, if it is an even number, inside of the if, I could have wrote continue. Because once continue is hit, this will not run. It will just increment I and start from whatever that is. So here, we can say, let I is 1, I is less than or equal to 5, I plus plus, right? Here we're just console logging I, right? But there's no 3 here. Because if I is 3, we're going to just continue. And once JavaScript reads continue, it skips the rest of the code, iterates, and then starts over again. Does everyone understand that? When I say keywords, while, let, continue, for, var, const, function, whatever. You can't name variables those words, okay? Because those have special meanings to JavaScript, just so everyone's aware, all right? So the keyword also works in while loops, right? So you have the counter out here. If count, oh, this is exactly what I just explained. If count mod 2 equals 0. You guys know what mod is, right? It just returns the remainder. If you divide it by that number, it returns the remainder. So if you take a number and you mod 2, if that's 0, then you know that that's an even number, okay? So if that is an even number, we're going to subtract 1 from count, and then we will continue. We won't console log that, okay? But you see how sort of continue is kind of annoying. While loops are kind of annoying because you see you have to write the decrementer in 2 places. Because it's not going to, it's not like a for loop where the for loop increments it for you after the code is done, right? So if you didn't write this here, then it would just keep going over and over again, pretty sure. Because then you would never be subtracting 1 from count. It works the same way as a for loop, though. Is everyone clear on that? Cool. So we have the break keyword breaks out of the loop permanently. So if we have my grade is a variable and we set that equal to A, we could say while true, right? Wait a second, that's never going to be false, right? It's just like the word true, and that's always true. But we're going to say my grade plus equals a plus, right? If my grade dot length is 3, it's not. A plus has a length of 2, right? Don't even worry about what's in the if statement. We're just going to do the while loop again. My grade, which is now A plus, is plus equals to another plus. So now it's equal to A plus plus. That length is 3, so this if statement is continued, and then JavaScript sees break. It just stops the loop. Whatever loop you're doing, whenever, whatever point of iteration you're at, once it sees that, it will just stop everything and then go to the outside of the loop and then run the rest of the code. Any questions on the break here? You have continue and break. Continue continues the for loop or while loop, but it just skips the current iteration. Break stops the loop, but continues the rest of the code. Yeah. Yeah. I've never tried to use it anywhere else, but I'm pretty sure it does. Break also works in for loops. You start at 10, right? You start at 10, let I equal to 10. I is greater than or equal to 1, and we'll subtract 1 every time from I. Console log, I is this. I is 10. Is that 7? No. So we keep going. 10, 9, 8. Okay. We subtract 1 from 8. So now I is 7. We console log it. Is I 7 break? The loop is done. The other numbers don't get logged out. Okay? Once it hits break, the loop stops. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about debugging really quickly before you guys take a break, and then I will slack out pairs and you guys will start the workshop. So developers spend way more time debugging code than writing it. This is very true. Let's review some good debugging techniques to help you write better code more quickly throughout the remaining workshops. Because from here on out, the workshops, you guys will have to solve problems, okay? You will have to write your own code to solve problems. But if you write one thing, you think it's right, and it's not, you have to figure out how to fix what you wrote, okay? So you have to debug error message. Let's start by considering bugs that come from writing invalid JavaScript code, like writing invalid syntax, like forgetting a semicolon inside of the for loop definition, or not, I don't know, trying to create a variable that's a keyword, right? You'll get sum is not defined or something like that. You'll get a reference error, okay? You just have to know how to read these errors over here, okay? Usually when you are writing a function and the function requires you to return something, and then you see something like this, sum is not defined, or sum is equal to undefined, well, sum is not defined is like you never declared sum. But if you get like sum is equal to undefined, usually like beginners like forget to return things from functions and try to like console log. Remember, console logging returns nothing, and functions implicitly, if you don't use the return keyword, returns undefined. Okay? So let's just keep that in mind. But the test them page in a what is that? Coder pen, whatever. So you have like the specs page, and then you have the README, right? When you guys are tackling problems, read the README first. And then if you click to the specs, you can click each spec and see like what it's actually doing. Also, some of you are I forgot to tell you guys, at the end of the workshops, there's code that looks like it says like describe, bracket, this, and then it, bracket, parenthesis, whatever. Whenever you see that describe, don't touch the coding. Okay? Don't alter that. That is what's running the tests. That's saying like what's passing, what's failing. These will be X's if they're failing, this will be green if it's passing, okay? You can read the tests. Sometimes that'll help you because in the actual test, you'll see that they're calling your function and passing in certain values. So you can kind of use them to figure out why your code is failing. You'll get what I mean sooner or later. So then, yeah, there's also like a stack trace over here, and you have, it says like JS11, right? That means JavaScript line 11. It kind of tells you what line of your code the error is being thrown at, okay? Figure out how to like move myself. And the line number may not always be accurate, but it's definitely a good place to start. Sometimes the line is referring to where the function began being defined, right? But the error is actually somewhere inside of the function, okay? You can always Google errors too, because Googling is just honestly a developer's best friend. It's like 95% of my job. It's just being on Google. When your test is failing, you'll get an output that compares the value your function returned against the expected value. And you see how it says expected 55 to equal 25. So that means the test is saying that it threw something into your function, and whatever happened, it should have been 25. But instead, we got 55. So that could be useful too. You could be like, oh, I should have added 20 instead of 50. But I added 50 because there's something wrong with me. You know what I mean? Note the plain English explanation of what the test is looking for. That can help. So, yeah. It's like kind of easy to read, honestly. It's just like only odds returns the sum of all odd nums between the provided argument and 0. That's like the test case. And then it just says expected 55 to equal 25. If your test is failing with undefined outputs, make sure you are returning values from your functions and not console logging them. And it could also help to look directly at the code that defines how the test is supposed to work. Look for a test with the same plain, yeah, okay. So the test is inside of the code pen, right? Ignore this .spec.js part. Unless you I think you could like download all of the, you could download them and put them in your own text editor if you want to. Then they'll be in there, but whatever. Yeah, so Chrome has a pretty cool tool. It's called Debugger. So basically, if you're running your code in REPL, for some reason my REPL's configured weirdly, so I can't really show you this. But, oh wait, I have this thing open. So like, if you just have, if you have like this thing like log characters, and we're gonna put in for loop here, and you just press enter, nothing happens, right? But if you have this thing open, this is called the Chrome DevTools. It's on a Mac, it's Command J, or if you want, you can just right click. Oh, you can't do that. Inspect, and it opens this up, and you have your console here, right? Console under this tab. So if you put this keyword in here and you try to run your code, you see how it says paused in debugger. And then all this stuff happens, and then you can click this button up here to step over into click this button to go next. And it kind of shows you like what's happening at each point in time, okay? You see it goes like, okay, it does this, it increments this, it logs this, it checks this, it does that, this, that, that. This is a useful way to debug like very big functions if you really don't know what's going on. But I think that the best way to debug your own code is to just console log and see what's going on. CodePen might be annoying to use because their console is kind of annoying. So I would definitely recommend to just copy and paste your code into your own REPL and then play with it there. That's what I think. Okay? I wouldn't worry too much about the debugger tool right now, but it's definitely useful. So you open DevTools, you right-click, inspect this console. The shortcut is Command-Option-J if you have a Mac. You run your code in CodePen, and then your code will pause when it hits the debugger keyword. And then you just select like the little arrow to go into each like line, you know? And it shows you what each variable you defined at, what its value is at each point in time after each line. There's also a text editor, VS Code. VS Code is dope. I definitely recommend using it. But there's also a debugger tool inside VS Code, and it's like this little cross sign with a bug in it. So you can click that, and it's kind of like the same. It's the same logic, you know. It shows at each point in time like what values what, and it's useful to help debug bigger problems. But like I said, console logging is usually more straightforward than using these third-party tools, you know. So we talked about loops, while loops, for loops, the break keyword, the continue keyword, and we talked a little bit about debugging. Does anyone have any questions before you guys take a break? Come back at 8 o'clock, and I will Slack out pairs and open up the workshop. Good job, guys. We made it.